Let's look at an example of using function overloading. So over here in main, I've kind of set up this program that just calculates the slope of 2 points. I forgot the slope function, so we have that there. And I've included a coordinate pair struct. So that is right here, and I'm going to add on to it. So in some cases, I could declare a coordinate pair, set x and y, but doing that would be kind of a pain in the butt. We'd say begin point.x is 2, begin point.y is 5, and so on. And just setting it up that way every time it's extra lines. So what we're going to do is we're going to create some setup functions. But what if someone wants to set it up based on the two numbers x and y? Or what if they have another point they want to copy as the starting point? So for instance, let's do a void setup with a float x and float y. And then we're going to overload the setup function, but have a different parameter. We'll say chord pair copy me. So these two functions are overloaded. They have the same return type and the same name, and that's okay. The thing that makes them distinct from each other are their parameter lists. So these two need to be distinct, either have a different number of parameters for each version or different data types. As long as it's unique and the compiler can tell what's going to be passed in, it's fine. So let's copy these, and in my coordinate pair.cpp file, we'll paste those over here. Need to put the class name, and we'll set these up. So when the user calls setup and just has an x and y value, I'm going to set our private, well, they're public member variables in this case, to x and y. Since these names, this x and this x, have the same name, but these are two different variables, I'm going to need to refer to this x as this x. So if there weren't a naming collision, I could say if this was new x instead, I could just say x is equal to new x. But if they have the same name, then we have to use the this operator to specify that this coordinate pair is the y we're setting here, and then that one is just from the parameter list. So whichever way is more comfortable, let's just set these to new x and new y. I tend to set it that way if I am using single letter variable names or not prefixing these with like m underscore. So we have that. That'll set up our x and y coordinate. And we can uncomment this code right here. We'll set it up, we can display it, and there we go. Begin point is 2, 5. Now I'm also going to set up an end point, and I want to set that to where it began at, and then I'm going to modify it from there. And of course, I could say endpoint.x is begin point.x, endpoint.y is begin point.y. But if we're going to be doing a lot of copying from one point to another, might as well make a function for it. And since we have our setup, we'll just use that. So we'll say we have copy me, x equals copy me's x coordinate, y equals copy me's y coordinate. So these two are implemented now, and I can uncomment these out. Now it sets up, it takes the begin point, whatever this has here, and sets its x and y, and then we can modify it from there and display that at the end. There. And so then we just have this simple float function like that. So that's an example of using function overloading. I tend to use this the most whenever I have something like a setup function, but I could have different sets of data that goes into it. Another example might be, another way we could use function overloading is if we wanted to be able to do the same or similar kind of functionality, but with different data types or different amounts of information. So So I'm going to write a display function that takes in some data and formats it in some way before displaying it to the user. So let's start with string data. So for strings, something I notice a lot when I'm debugging things and if I have like a debug log, if a string is empty and it displays that, sometimes it's hard to tell in a log if it's empty and then it just shows blank. It would be a lot better to display the data in double quotes. And then that way, whenever we ask to display a string information, that way, anytime we ask to display a piece of string data, it will be enclosed in double quotes. So that way, for instance, if we just had, if we had an empty string like that, it would at least put it in double quotes rather than if we only did output the data. Here, you can't really tell anything got outputted, so we will keep this version. If we had a character, we could, for instance, also do the same thing. Char, we'll just keep naming it data. Output, let's do single quotes because it's a character. And so if we did, let's say char symbol is $. Let's do display product name, display symbol. So here's the char version or the character version. So the function call looks the same. We're just passing different data types in here. Let's do void display for a float. And we're going to assume this is going to be currency. So we'll do output $, and let me look up how to do currency. Do fixed, set precision to, and then the data. Let's see if that looks correct when we output it. So display price, let's change this to 40 cents and make sure it has the 40. And it might need the IOmanip library. Okay, so then we have 123 and 40 cents. I do not think that counts for commas in our dollar string, but that's okay. So, if we have a float, in this context, we are assuming it's going to be a price, and we'll display it as such. And then let's just do void display for int data. Is there any specific way we want to display ints? Let's just put a £sign and data. So it's the number 1, number 2. I did not call display though. Display quantity. And here we have number 5. So in a larger program, this could be useful for if you're writing a debug logger or just anytime you wanted to format data in a certain way before presenting it to the user, or you could take in different data and store it in different ways. It's really very open-ended. It's just a matter of design and kind of what's correct for your, and kind of what's useful for what you're doing. Now, for a larger project, how might function overloading be used? Well, here's a simple little game that never got done. But for instance, in my character class, I have several move functions where I can pass in a direction and the map file. Just that would be for detecting collision. I could pass in just a direction of where they're going to go. Or I can pass in a direction and basically boundaries on the edge of the screen to keep them on the screen. So if I ran this, I'm not using that version. I can still run off the side of the screen. So that's one example there. My game object parent class has several set texture functions, whether you are passing in the texture information, the coordinates like the left, right, top, bottom, or width and height as a int rect structure, or just passing in those values separately. And similar for set position. Are you passing it in as a vector 2f, which is basically just a xy coordinate, Or are you passing it in as X and Y? So those are some different examples of how we could use function overloading in a bigger project.